Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Jane, for joining us. Um, I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Polly Stern. I work at the Watertown Free Public Library, and we're having some video issues on my side. So that's why you can't see me right now, but you're here to see Jane, so it doesn't really matter. Jane Roper is the author of two novels, The Society of Shame and Eden Lake, and a memoir, Double Time, How I Survived and Mostly Thrived Through the First 3 Years of Mothering Twins. Her writing has appeared in Salon, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, The Millions, Poets and Writers, LitHub, NPR, and elsewhere. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, Jane currently lives just north of Boston with her awesome husband, her rad teenage twins, and two cats. And I have the pleasure of knowing Jane's family, and they are all awesome and rad. And I'm so pleased to be hosting this. So take it away, Jane.
Thank you so much, Polly. I really appreciate being here. I appreciate the invitation. Hi everyone. It's weird to be like presenting and not being able to see anyone, but I recognize a few familiar names out there, and grateful to you for coming, and to those who I don't know as well. Thank you. My novel, The Society of Shame, was published in April. And I thought I'd just share a little bit about the book and what inspired me to write it. And then I will read a little bit from it. And then we can open it up to Q&A to talk about writing or books or publishing or what weird things are on my shelves. That's my great grandmother. That's my wedding invitation. Anyway. All right. So The Society of Shame, I wrote for two real reasons. The first reason was that I was on the rebound from another novel that I'd been working on for years, that was a very serious subject matter. It was about cancer and childhood cancer. It was about class and gentrification and a very fraught relationship between two women. I poured my heart and soul into it. It was a deeply personal novel to me because it drew on our family's experiences with my daughter's cancer when she was little. She's all better now. And it was, like other things I had written, quite earnest, quite serious. My sort of education as a writer began with literary fiction, and I admired and aspired to write literary fiction. I went to an MFA program where that was sort of the coin of the realm was, you wanted to be an award winner. You wanted to write beautiful, thought-provoking, gorgeous prose and have everyone think you're really smart. So that's what I tried to do for a very long time. And I didn't have a ton of success with that. My first novel that I wrote was not published at all. The second one didn't find a major publisher, Eden Lake, and I did find a small publisher. And that third novel that I just mentioned did not sell, did not have a home. And I was pretty bereft at that point. But I also realized, I needed to make a change. So at first I thought, well, I'm never going to write fiction again. I'm just going to write nonfiction. I know how to do that. I'm good at that. I know how to bring my full self to the page. I know how to be funny. I know how to be, make commentary on things that are important to me. Somehow I'd never figured out how to do that with fiction. So that was my initial plan. But then an idea came along for a book. And before I knew it, I was writing another novel. But I told myself this time it's going to be really different. I'm not going to do what I've always done because I'll get what I've always gotten. So I decided to do something incredibly different, satirical, funny, not taking itself as seriously, not taking myself as seriously. And I wrote it fast, a lot faster than I'd ever written a book before. And lo and behold, it became The Society of Shame, and it actually got published. The spark of the idea was a story that I saw online about it's kind of an awful story. A man came home to find his wife and her lover dead from carbon monoxide poisoning in his garage. Pretty horrible. And but the story had kind of gone viral, and people were commenting on it, making lots of jokes, and it got me thinking about the humiliation, right? And the infidelity, finding out that someone's been unfaithful is humiliating in and of itself, but to have it be public and in such a crazy way would just multiply the humiliation. And I've always been fascinated since the early days of the internet. I was sort of an early adopter. I was blogging since 2005. I got on, social media right when, at the beginning of it, but I'd always been fascinated by the way people treat and mistreat each other online. Always been fascinated by how things go viral, what does or doesn't, the way that people can become lifted up and become famous and exalted and heroic in an instant and then suddenly be brought back down. So I wanted to combine all of these things. And I thought, what would happen if somebody got famous, internet famous, for whom it was the ultimate nightmare? Someone who did not want to be seen, someone who was obsessed with what other people thought of her, and so as a result hid from the spotlight. And that's how I came up with the main character for the Society of Shame. Her name is Kathleen Held. She's 47 years old. She's a wife. She's a copy editor. She's a mother of a 12-year-old girl. She's married to a very, very successful and charismatic politician named Bill Held. No relation to Bill Weld. Only Massachusetts people have commented on that, but there's no link there. And she one night comes home early from a trip, which is never advisable when you're married to a charismatic politician. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's okay. In this case, it's not a good idea. She came home early and she thought she was going to have the house to herself. She thought that Bill was going to be out at an important fundraiser. So she would have this nice time to herself to relax. And she finds out when she gets home that that's not the case at all. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book to show you what does happen when she gets home by herself. All right. So if I can find my paper. Okay. By the time the taxi had turned onto her street, Kathleen had started picturing where she'd be in a matter of minutes. Sitting on the three-season porch in a fresh change of clothes, she imagined some loose, breezy linen ensemble that she didn't actually own, having a glass of white wine, catching up on her New Yorkers, ignoring the dog. Instead, she came home to smoke billowing out of the garage. "That doesn't look so good," the taxi driver said. Kathleen bolted out of the car. The driver was close behind her. "Is anybody in the house?" he asked. "No, yes, Nugget. Shit." "Nugget shit?" "Nugget, our dog," said Kathleen. "He's in there." She started toward the house, but the driver flung his arm in front of her chest. "Don't you go in there, ma'am. You call 911. I'll go get your dog. My twin brother's a firefighter." "What's that got to do with... You want your dog to die of smoke inhalation? What does he look like?" "He looks like a dog," said Kathleen. "He's the only one in there. But the house doesn't look like it's on fire. I can really just... Big dog, small dog?" "A Yorkshire Terrier. Small, with a missing eye, but small one-eyed dog. Got it. Give me your keys." She handed him the keys just to get rid of him and called 911. When she got off the phone with the dispatcher, she moved a few paces over the lawn toward the garage. The smoke was thicker than it had been seconds before, and there were now tendrils of flame creeping out from under the roof. The left-hand garage door was open, and Kathleen saw that the source of the blaze was Bill's 1969 Dodge Charger, which she'd bought on a whim the year before. It was completely engulfed in flames. In spite of herself, Kathleen felt a flare of triumph. She'd told him repeatedly that it was a death trap. She'd been referring to its lack of three-point seatbelts and airbags, but the fact that it was now on fire was not altogether surprising to her. Still, poor Bill was going to be heartbroken. She dialed his number and was waiting for him to pick up when suddenly there he was, emerging from the garage, stumbling and coughing, a spent fire extinguisher in his hands, wearing nothing but a half-unbuttoned white dress shirt and boxer shorts. "Bill, Jesus!" She ran toward him. "What's happening? Are you okay?" He staggered forward a few more steps, then tossed the fire extinguisher aside, fell to his hands and knees, hacking and coughing, and vomited onto the grass. Kathleen knelt beside him and rubbed his back. After a few final mucus-drenched coughs, he looked at her. "I'm sorry, Kath," he croaked. "Sorry for what? What happened?" In the distance, there was the wail of sirens. "Shit," Bill said, and commenced coughing again. "I got him, all good." The taxi driver was coming down the front walk, Nugget a small, hairy lump in his arms. "Hey," he pointed to Bill. You're that guy who's running for president. I saw you on the news. Senate, Bill managed to gasp. The driver grinned. Sure, that's where it starts. He handed Nugget to Kathleen, nearly knocking her to the ground, then pulled his phone out of his pocket and crouched next to Bill to snap a selfie. Delete that, Bill yelled, his voice suddenly strong and clear. Don't worry, said the driver, standing back up. I won't show it to anyone, just my wife. Please delete, Bill said before he was racked by another coughing fit. An ambulance and a fire engine were pulling into the driveway now. All right. The driver tapped at his phone in a not entirely convincing way. I guess you being in your underwear and everything. For the first time, it occurred to Kathleen to wonder, why was Bill in his underwear? Bill, she said, were you in the middle of getting dressed? In the car? He turned his head toward her, and the look in his eyes was one of utter defeat. I'm so sorry, Kath, he rasped. She just... Kathleen felt the blood drain from her limbs. Please let him be referring to the car, she thought. But Bill was not the kind of man who referred to cars or boats or any other mode of transportation as she. She wouldn't have married him if he were. He started coughing again, and this time it sounded decidedly fake. Kathleen stood and turned slowly around. Atop the low wall on the other side of the driveway was a woman in a disheveled blue cocktail dress, barefoot, slumped over on her side, her face partially obscured by the low-hanging branches of a rhododendron. A pair of hot pink panties dangled from her left ankle. Uh-oh, said the driver. Who is... Kathleen could barely force the words from her throat. That. Bill did not reply. Is she dead? The driver eventually said. She drank too much, said Bill. I don't know, said the driver. She looks pretty dead. Excuse me, Kathleen said, a scrap of breath having returned to her lungs. Could you give us some space, please? She turned and thrust Nugget into the driver's arms. Keep him if you want. Nah, I'm not really a dog person. And the missing eye thing... You can't keep him, said Bill. Just go away. The driver shrugged and ambled down the lawn. Who is that? Kathleen asked Bill again. But before Bill could answer or take his fake coughing up a notch, 2 EMTs appeared, one man and one woman, and clapped an oxygen mask to his face. Kathleen turned away. Across the driveway, the girl in the dress was also being attended to by an EMT. Kathleen recognized her now, one of a bevy of 20-something women who worked on Bill's campaign. If he was going to do this, did he have to be such a goddamn cliche about it? She felt the sudden, violent urge to be as far from him as possible. I'm going to get Nugget. She started down the lawn to where the taxi driver was holding up Nugget's paw and making him wave at a neighbor's cell phone camera. She hadn't gotten more than a few steps when the female EMT caught up to her. Hey, ma'am, the EMT said softly. She touched her palm to Kathleen's shoulder, and for a second, Kathleen thought perhaps she was going to try to comfort her. It's okay, I'm fine, Kathleen said, though, in fact, she was suddenly on the edge of tears just from that gentle touch. Would it be strange if she hugged the EMT? Yes, it would. You just had a little, leak, the EMT said. She shrugged off her jacket and tied it around Kathleen's waist. A leak? The fire chief will want to give the all clear before he lets you into the house, but I think you could sneak around the back door and change if you wanted. I'll cover for you. You're clear. She turned Kathleen toward the house and gave her a little shove. Go! It wasn't until she was rounding the back corner of the house that Kathleen realized, with a growing sense of dread, what had probably happened. In her haste to get home after her flight landed, she hadn't stopped to use the bathroom at JFK, and therefore she hadn't changed the tampon she'd been wearing since she left LA. The weird, flimsy, organic hemp made by women in Malawi tampon she'd had to borrow from her sister when her period showed up 4 days early with a vengeance, the way it so often did of late. Except, of course, when it didn't show up at all. What a joy it was to be 47. Inside the house, she flung off the EMT's jacket and raced to the bathroom off the kitchen, where she climbed up onto the toilet and peered over her shoulder to see herself in the mirror. And there it was. On the very bottom of the seat of her pale green capris was a circle of dark, ugly blood the size of a saucer. She sat down on the toilet and sobbed. Poor Kathleen. So what ensues from there is that, as it turns out, the taxi driver, our pal, has taken a photo clandestinely. He's took a photo when no one was looking. And in the photo, you can see Bill in his underwear. You can see the girl, the mistress, passed out on the other side of the driveway. And you can see Kathleen from behind, including the big menstrual stain on the back of her pants. And the photo promptly goes viral because of course it would. And of course, the thing that everyone is much more concerned with than Bill's infidelity is this period stain on her back of her pants. And some people think it's disgusting and awful, and that causes an upswell of support and from women and others who are saying, look, menstruation's normal, it's natural, it's something we need to get rid of the stigma. And they form a movement called #YesWeBleed. Kathleen wants no part of this at first, but when she intercepts an invitation to something called the Society of Shame, which is all people who have been shamed or humiliated or otherwise become internet famous for reasons they're not so happy about, they encourage her to step into the spotlight. And what happens from there is a wild ride. One of the things that the book does is, well, I guess I did it, is it includes these interstitial chapters that show you things happening in the media. So like social media threads and blog posts and transcripts from news programs and everything. And if you'll indulge me, I'll just read a quick little clip from one of those. And then I'll shut up and let you guys ask questions. So this takes the form of a press release. And it's actually, the publisher did such a cool job of making all of these look authentic. So for immediate release, Womenopause Festival and Celebration of Menopause to be held in Oquirrh Peaks. Oquirrh Peaks. The Yes We Age chapter of the newly formed Yes We Bleed League of Santa Fe will host a Womenopause Festival in Oquirrh Peaks, New Mexico on October 31st. The festival, themed Women Without Pause, is geared towards self-identifying women aged 40 or older. The women of all ages are welcome. Scheduled sessions include This Girl is on Fire, tapping the secret power of temperature dysregulation. The Better to Eat You With, reclaiming the sexy grandma trope. Journey to Pleasure, vibrators, dildos, and lube, oh my. Mood Surfing, learning to ride the wave. And Sunrise Sunset, show tunes about aging, with karaoke. With new sessions being added daily as the schedule is finalized. Other activities will include dances, folk, disco, and expressive, sharing circles, a nightly all-you-can-drink cocktail and green tea hour, and a performance by the Progester-Tones a cappella ensemble. The festival will culminate on the final evening with a primal scream at sunset. For more information updates, follow Womenopause on Facebook. So there you go. There's a taste of the book. So I would love to hear anyone has questions or anything, and I'll, if you put them in the chat, I will read them aloud and do my best to answer. I hope everyone's alive out there.
Jane, would it be easier if I read you the questions?
Either way, that's fine. I mean, I can see the chat, so
okay.
Whatever you like.
Okay, yeah, I'll let you do it then.
Okay. I'll start making up my own questions. Okay, let's see. DeWitt, the Society of Shame would seem to have little in common with a Vietnam War novel, especially The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, it's an amazing book. But I wondered how you relate to his phrase, I felt ashamed of my conscience. Oh, interesting. I'm thinking of the conflict between guilt and shame in both contexts, yours and his. Wow, that's an interesting question. I'm curious to know the larger context of the O'Brien quote when he's talking about being ashamed of his conscience. Is he ashamed of the fact that he has one, or ashamed of the fact that his conscience is telling him something? Maybe if you want to answer that, DeWitt, that would help. But I will, in the meantime, say that, I think shame and guilt are these intertwined things. We have guilt when we feel that we're not doing something we should be doing. We're not doing something that, we're not adhering to some sort of rule or expectation. whether that's what we should eat or how we should behave, or an obligation we feel we should fulfill. Whereas shame, and that it's internal, right? A lot of that guilt becomes internal. Shame is a much I think it's a much more intense emotion. It's a degree above guilt. Shame is where sort of it's not so much about your judgment of yourself, it's how you imagine other people judging you, I think. And shame really does play a role in societies. Shaming people plays a role in society of reinforcing norms and reinforcing the rules of society. When shame is done in a healthy way, you can maybe make people feel uncomfortable and make them feel the humiliation or the shame of what they've done, but then you give them an opportunity to come back into the fold, to apologize, to redeem themselves. Some things are more redeemable than others, but that's sort of the healthy use of shame. It seems like a lot of shaming that happens online, though, doesn't happen with that sense of mercy behind it, or that sense of we're going to teach you a lesson, but we also want you to come back in. We're going to call you in, not just going to call you out. We're going to call you back in as well. So that's what, I talk a lot about in the book, is this notion of shaming online, shaming in public, and how there's so little nuance so often. So, through the story and through the characters, I'm trying to show a little more of that nuance and how it's way more complicated than we can talk about or understand through a tweet, where everyone feels like they have to weigh in either for or against, and no gray area, nothing in between. If you're bad, you're bad. If you're good, you're good. And we're going to treat everyone with the same degree, even without knowing all the details. Okay, let's see. The O'Brien figure doesn't want to go to Vietnam War combat, but does go because he doesn't want to risk the good opinion of his culture and society. This seems to be an American crisis having to do with icons and propaganda. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, because it's there's both guilt there, guilt that I should be doing something, and then maybe shame. The shame is more around oh gosh, how come I'm the only one who has a conscience here, or is something wrong with me, that I have this conscience, that I have this that he doesn't want to go. So yeah, it's complicated stuff, and I would not have related. What's interesting about Kathleen feels shame for her period being visible, which speaks to the kind of craziness that there's shame around this bodily function. Although she doesn't until later in the book become actually shamed, as in called out for her behavior. So thanks, DeWitt. That's a great question. I don't know if I answered it, but
I was really fascinated with the relationship between Kathleen and Aggie, and the kind of twists and turns that took throughout the book, and how Kathleen thought that she was doing all this stuff for Aggie, and then sort of realized that maybe she had gone too far. Can you talk a little bit about their relationship?
Yeah, and I'm glad you liked that relationship. Aggie is Kathleen's daughter, and initially in the earlier drafts of the book, their relationship wasn't as big a part, and people, kind of other readers and my agent, pushed me to drill down into that, and I'm really glad that they did, because I feel like it gives the book sort of its emotional center. But yeah, Aggie, unlike her mother, is really genuinely invested in the Yes We Bleed movement. She also, unlike her mother, it doesn't really care so much about what other people think of her, or what other people are going to say about her. Kathleen projects some of her own fears and some of her memories of getting picked on in middle school onto her daughter, and repeatedly her daughter Aggie is Mom, it's fine. Kathleen is worried about her being in the spotlight, if she gets too involved. And again, Aggie's just I got this, Mom. But at the same time, yeah, Kathleen is becoming so obsessed with her image and her fame, and that she kind of loses sight of who she is and what's most important to her, and it leads to tension between her and Aggie. So I had fun creating Aggie's character, also like as the mom of, when I was writing it, mom of tweens. I guess they were already 13, my two kiddos, and so I was definitely inspired a little bit by them. But I also knew how, like, that's such a fragile age, right? Like when you're 12, 13, and you're right on that cusp between childhood and teenagerdom. And I think, Aggie's in seventh grade, which for me was like the nadir of my existence. I don't think I've ever been as like miserable as I was in seventh grade. So Aggie does surprisingly well given that. But yeah, I enjoyed writing that relationship a lot. Okay, here's a question. I'll ask myself a question. What is with the cover? What's did you have any input into the cover? Did you know they were gonna put swans on it? Did you ask for swans? I did not ask for swans, but I love this cover and color. I've been known to accessorize to match my cover. I I didn't really have any input. Just one day my editor sent me an email and said, here are 3 cover options. I was like, oh, I thought maybe we would discuss this, but no, okay, that's all right. And one of them had like a woman, an illustration of a woman on the cover, sort of like peeking out from between her hands. And it was cute, but it felt kind of generic, and I wasn't nuts about it. And then 2 of them had swans. And at first I was sort of taken aback. I was like, don't know, we really want to, like, swans aren't a major part of the plot. There are swans. There's a pair of beloved swans named Sunny and Cher in the book, and they become important. But I wasn't, I don't know. I'd never thought of it as something like pivotal to the book. But the more I sat with the designs, the more I loved it. And I think that what is so brilliant about it is the designer sort of hooked on the swan as like this emblem of pride and vanity, but also of shame, right? So the swan's got like these sunglasses and is like hiding his or her head. And in the book, Kathleen, some large sunglasses figure in with Kathleen. But I thought it really is a great metaphor for ugly duckling to swan, for vanity, for all kinds of things. And also it's just, I don't know, it's intriguing. Also, one of my favorite books ever, I'm looking behind me to see if I have it on the shelf. I guess I don't, but is Straight Man by Richard Russo. He's like one of my favorite writers, and he's funny as hell. So anyway, so that Straight Man has this goose on the front, and I was excited to have something similar. And I made an ass of myself telling him that once when I met him at a festival recently, and he was not impressed with me. Okay, I see a couple Q&As. So, all right, anonymous attendee, how easy was it to finally settle on the first sentence or the first paragraph? I have a hard time with mine. Oh my gosh, yes. It is, so my problem isn't so much like settling on it. Like, I feel like I'm pretty good at first sentences. My problem is letting go of those first few lines once I've written them, because I tend to write chronologically, and like I'll start right at the beginning. So once I kind of like am living with that first sentence or first sentences, first paragraph, like I get attached to them. So then I have a hard time going back objectively and saying like, well, is this the right opening paragraph? Like, is this the right way to start? But usually it's the result of many attempts right at the get-go, like right at the beginning. So I'm working on a new book, for example, now, and I have done like a zillion different starts to like opening paragraphs. So, but I know, like I feel like I finally hit on it. It just, I don't know, just like feels right? It has a resonance. I think you got to go with your gut to some degree. But also be flexible and willing to go back and change it, which is my problem, that I struggle with that. So, okay, Julia. So what inspired you to write this book? Such a relevant topic. I really enjoyed it. I could not put it down. Thank you so much. I am so glad. Kathleen is a great character. Yeah. So as I mentioned, there was that story about the man coming home and finding that his wife and her lover were dead in the garage. But that, like I said, that got me thinking about public humiliation. But I really did feel like internet fame, internet culture, media, politics. These are all things that I follow very closely and find fascinating, and also just love making fun of and like satirizing and parodying. So I knew that writing a book in that world would just be a lot of fun. And I knew that there was a lot of rich stuff there that I could play around with. I knew that by looking at online shaming and online fame, that maybe I could bring to, I don't know, raise some questions, right? I don't think there's any, definitive answers when people talk about like cancel culture, as if it's this one thing or as if it's terrible, or it's so complex. And I think fiction is so great at giving us different ways to look at complex issues and complex cultural phenomena. And there are a lot of those in this book. And yeah, I had a blast doing it. How long did it take me to write? For me, I wrote this incredibly fast. And by that, I mean, the first draft took me about a year, maybe even a little less. I mean, this is the previous book I'd written, the one that didn't get published, took me about 5 years to write. And yeah, part of my objective, and not objective, but one of the things I told myself when I started this book, I was like, I'm never going to spend that long on a book again, unless somebody has already given me money for it, and told me they're going to publish it, because it's just, to write it on spec. I don't want to invest quite that much time, at least not at this point in my life. Maybe that will change. So yeah, it was quick, about a year for the first draft. And then it was probably another 6 months. Well, it was like a first and a half draft, I guess. And then it was been another, few months sort of working through more revisions with my agent, and then getting some input from my editor once we sold the book. What is the best piece of writing advice you've received that you still use in your own writing? Oh gosh, let's see. Well, I love the quote by E.L. Doctorow, I believe, and I'm gonna like mangle it, but it's that writing a novel is like driving on a dark road at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole journey that way. And I love that, like just this idea that, and I don't know, some people I think can see the whole journey of their novel like in advance, but I'm not one of those people. So I love that idea, and the reassurance that it's okay to just go one, a few yards at a time, just go as far as you can see, keep going, and you'll make that whole journey. So that's one piece of writing advice that I love. The other one I have to say, I mean, is just, it's not so much advice. Well, I guess it's advice, is like, keep showing up, right? That write even when you're not inspired to write. You have to show up at your desk or your computer or your chair or whatever. Even if all you do is sit there and stare at the page, you have to go, you think of it like work. You have to go to work, even when you're not inspired. I find one thing that I've been doing recently more of is on those days when I feel especially uninspired, I will set myself a Pomodoro timer, like a 25-minute timer. And I'm like, if I can just focus and do this for 25 minutes, that's all I have to do. I'm going to give myself that small assignment. And I find that that's really, really helpful for me to just, at least I've shown up, at least I've done the work, and eventually you're going to actually have something. And to not beat yourself up if you have a crappy writing day. That's so important. All right, Gran Griffith, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. How do you choose your characters' names? Oh, choosing names is so much fun. Honestly, I just kind of do it by like gut, like I'll have an idea of a character in my mind and what they're like, and how I imagine them sounding or acting or looking. And I just get a gut feeling. Now I have to factor in their age, right? So what names would have been popular when they were young? I have to factor in their, background or ethnicity. I got to factor in also how their name sounds, and if it sounds like too similar to another character. So, I wouldn't want a character named Jake and a character named Jack. Like that would be really confusing and mean to readers. I sometimes I have a baby naming book. These are all my like reference books, and I've got a baby name book. So sometimes I'll just go through there and come up with ideas. Sometimes I end up not loving a name, and changing it down the road. For example, the character in the book named Mona was initially named Maya, and it didn't feel quite right. And then somebody actually, quite by accident, I think it was my editor, referred to her as Mona by mistake. And I was like, that's her name. It's Mona. That's definitely her name. She's more of a Mona than a Maya. And who knows, what that comes from, why I feel that way. Maybe I have an association with some Mona in my mind. And I think for everyone, it's going to be different. I'm thinking of crowdsourcing. I know some authors like ask readers to come up with a name for a character. They tend to be authors who are like, have gazillions of readers and stuff, but what the hell, maybe I'll try it. Okay. DeWitt has a question. Oh, this is a good one. So, what was the boundary about using real names? For example, David Foster Wallace, as well as lesser borderline celebrities, news anchors, etc. There's, at one point, Danica says, Terry Gross would love to interview you. The copy editor for the book, during the copy editing process, she went through and made a list of all the, I guess this is what they do. They make these lists of, to be able to check accuracy of geographic names, locations, any sort of real life thing. So there's a whole list of celebrities. I think that I don't know, nobody said anything. I think I had to be, I couldn't have defamed anyone or slandered anyone, right? I couldn't have done anything that someone could, sue me for. So, I could not have sort of portrayed a celebrity doing something that they wouldn't have done. Like, I think if I wrote about Nicole Kidman, torturing a puppy, Nicole Kidman would probably not like that and maybe would sue me. I don't know. So, so I was careful to make sure that, when I mentioned celebrities, it was never in horrible terms. Although I do get a little snarky about David Foster Wallace, I confess. I mean, not directly. The characters say something sort of snarky about him. But yeah, I had fun dropping all the pop culture references. Although, one thing that's funny is a lot of the book takes place on Twitter. Twitter is a character in the book. And now Twitter's X, and Twitter is probably on the verge of imploding. So I was joking to someone, I was like, by the time the paperback comes out, which is in March, it's going to be historical fiction because nobody, there's not going to be a Twitter anymore. And yes, I'm also pretty snarky about contemporary publishing in the book. That is true. Yes. And yet the publishers, a publisher still wanted to publish it. So, oh, did I pull the stories for the other society members from the headlines or make them up? So for those who haven't read the book, the society is this club that Kathleen is invited to join of all these different folks who've been shamed or become famous or otherwise online. And they each have their own little origin story for why. Some of them, none of them are direct pulls from the headlines, but they're certainly inspired by, and I created them to show a range of different things. So, for example, you have Mona, formerly Mona, who calls the police when there's a Black utility worker in her yard because she thinks he's a prowler or something, right? So there are a lot of these stories online and that often go viral of a white person calling the police totally unnecessarily on a person of color. So I wanted to get that in there. There was another character is Brett. Is he Brett or Brent? I can never remember. The Moonabomber. And that this is in the book, who is caught in the background of a photo of a couple's anniversary party, mooning the camera. And that didn't actually happen as far as I know. But there was a story that I read there's a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which was useful for research by John Ronson. And I don't know if anyone remembers this, but there was a story of a young woman, she and her friend had gone to, I don't know if it was Arlington Cemetery or some other military cemetery. And there was a sign that said, please be quiet and respectful or something. So they took a funny picture with her crouched down by by the sign or by a grave or something, going pretending to yell ah, and giving the finger. So, right, she's showing herself not being quiet and respectful. Funny, right? I mean, funny, but not a good thing to put on Facebook, which she did. So it promptly went viral, and she was just getting slammed by, veterans and families of it, and everyone for being so disrespectful and horrible to veterans. A dumb thing to do. But she was deeply depressed, and I think she lost her job. The consequences went kind of bonkers, in my opinion. So yeah, I wanted to just show a range with the characters in the society to different kinds of things that they did, that some were more forgivable than others, and also have each of the people react in different ways, right? So that some are more eager and willing to move forward, to maybe learn from the mistake, to redeem themselves, or to make up for what they've done, and others are digging in their heels or are not able to move forward at all. So yeah, that's a society.
One of the other things that made me laugh throughout the book were all the pop culture references from like when we were younger. And I don't know where you came up with the review that Kathleen saw in the paper about a musical adaptation of Die Hard, but that made me crack up.
Oh, good. There's a musical adaptation of like everything now, right? It's only a matter of time until there's an adaptation of Die Hard. It would not be the first thing from the book that came true. So yeah, waiting for that to happen. I had fun with the pop culture, a lot of the Gen X pop culture references. No.
Maybe that'll push somebody to actually do the musical.
Yeah, maybe. We can only hope. Or not, or fear. So this was great. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And those of you who've read the book, I really appreciate it. And if you're interested in, I've got a Substack called Jane's Calamity. You could look up if you feel like. I blog periodically about various random things, including books I read and writing and process. And it's a very eclectic Substack, and it's free. It's all free. So I'd love to see you there if you're interested.
Great. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope you do read the book. I listened to it, which was great, too. The narrator did a very good job. And keep your eyes out on the watertownlib.org for other events coming up. And thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.